As the United States government allocates billions of dollars to build infrastructure in other countries, it's neglecting to repair some of the most basic resources here at home. It raises questions about the priorities surrounding one of the main things that impacts us all, the roads. RT's Rachel Blevins has the story.
The current state of infrastructure in the United States leaves much to be desired. But even here in the nation's capital, drivers are forced to deal with inconveniences like potholes on a daily basis, and they are paying for it in more ways than one. Statistics from AAA show that damage from potholes cost Americans more than $3 billion each year. They say that in 5 years, 16 million drivers across the country have suffered pothole damage to their vehicles. The problems range from tire puncture and bent wheels to more expensive suspension damage. Last month, the roads here in Washington, D.C. made headlines when a sinkhole was discovered just blocks from the White House. In another recent case, 5 vehicles collided and 3 people were injured on a busy D.C. road that is riddled with potholes. Investigators said that the poor road conditions were a prime suspect. The District of Columbia's budget to repair roads, sidewalks, and alleys is more than $430 million in 2019. The funds to repair roads here in the United States also include billions of dollars from the federal government. But the roads in the U.S. are not the only ones the government is funding. The U.S. reportedly spent more than $3 billion to reconstruct or repair 10,000 miles of roads in Afghanistan. And a government oversight report found that 95% of the sections of roads were either damaged or destroyed. The government's own efforts to maintain roads here in the U.S. has left many wondering why necessary repairs are still lacking. It has even gotten to the point where last year Domino's Pizza launched a nationwide campaign to fill in potholes in order to deliver pizzas, and their movement quickly went viral. Even with billions of dollars in funding, Americans are still facing billions of dollars in damages from failing roads, which creates safety risks across the board. So it has raised the question, is the government simply failing to allocate enough funding to fix the roads, or should their failure bring Americans back to the age-old debate of who will build the roads? In Washington, Rachel Blevins, RT.
For more on the country's infrastructure crisis, we turn to investigative journalist Ben Swann. Ben, thanks for being here.
Hey, Sarah.
Ben, we're in D.C., the nation's capital, the city where government officials, congressmen, senators, the Trump administration, Trump himself drives along these streets and roads, and we still can't get those fixed?
Well, I mean, that's a good point, right? I think, though, when you consider the fact that a lot of the members of Congress who drive on those roads don't actually drive themselves, like how many members of Congress actually drive their own car, including the president, right? So I think that it's easy for them to ignore a lot of those issues. And then, as you know very well, being in Washington, D.C., you're broken up into a quadrant there, right? What things look like in Northwest D.C., very different than what they might look like in Southeast D.C. So certainly within the nation's capital alone, there's probably disparity in terms of what the roads look like, but that's also the issue that we're seeing across the nation, and vast amounts of this nation's infrastructure, from roads to bridges and highways, need to be desperately repaired and are decaying, and very little is being done to fix that.
Well, and that's something that President Trump ran his campaign on, infrastructure, spending a lot of money on it. He released 2017 report. That bill didn't even pass the House. It hardly got any attention. We saw a 2.6% increase in a total defense budget this year to $716 billion. No one questions that. Why aren't people questioning more like bridges, roads? What happened to the America First policy?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, we have a general sentiment in the public here in the United States that we do not ever question military spending. And let's make no mistake about it. We refer to this as the defense budget, right? But it's not about defense at all. These are not budgets that are working to defend the sovereignty and the safety of the United States and its citizens. Instead, it is the empire machine in terms of military equipment, military contractors, and money being spent to ever expand the empire that is the United States. So, but there's never a question being raised about that. Meanwhile, and as you mentioned, we have these decaying infrastructure situations in place, and very little is done about it. And when it comes time to run for office, it seems like politicians will talk about it, but then they ignore it as soon as they get in. I mean, keep this in mind. You know, President Trump has talked a lot about this border wall. Just take that for instance. It costs anywhere, and this is an estimate from the White House, anywhere from $8 million to $25 million per mile that wall would be built, depending on where it's being built. And that's a huge discrepancy in terms of the price tag. But if you take that same number and you compare it to what it would cost to build roads and highways, brand new 2- and 4-lane highways, you could do 2 to 4 times as many miles worth of highways as you can for border wall for the same price. And yet that is, again, a completely ignored subject because it's not as vitriolic and it's not as exciting to people as it is to talk about things like border security.
Well, hopefully, I mean, these are things that people use on every day in their everyday lives several times here in D.C., other places like California and New York who have the worst infrastructure as far as roads, bridges are falling apart. Hopefully, if, like Pence made a statement saying that they're going to announce a new bill, hopefully that's a bipartisan one that will help pass. Investigative journalist Ben Swann, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Sarah.
Hey YouTube, thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this last video. We have a ton more great content just like this for you. So if you want more, make sure you go ahead and subscribe. And remember, never stop questioning more.